Good afternoon and welcome again to the Serious Security Seminar Series. We're very happy this afternoon to be hosting a speaker from McAfee Corporation. George Herron has been in the computing industry for over 30 years, the last 20 in security. His job as chief scientist at McAfee is to look at trends in technology, look at new problems, find solutions, and ensure that they find their way into the product line to help customers, residences, businesses, government agencies protect their systems against all kinds of threats. One of the technologies he's been tracking, and he'll be talking about with us today, is in the area of virtualization. This is a technology that is being promoted by a number of companies, being built into hardware, offers a number of very interesting challenges and opportunities in security lifecycle management. And so without further ado, please join me in welcoming George Herron. Thank you, George.
Thank you, Scott. Thank you all. It is a great pleasure to be with you here today. We're going to move at a pretty good clip. I have some information that I'd like to be presenting as I describe it, a convergence of the security field and that of virtualization. Virtualization, of course, being rather new in some of our technical approaches to using computer systems and extolling different kinds of capabilities from them. Security, on the other hand, has been around for a while, and I just show the latest years here on how the different kinds of security solutions have been coming along, and industry finds a solution, and another problem comes along and we find a solution. First there was polymorphic viruses back in the early days, and again the early days for security dates back into the 80s when boot sector disks, and I suspect some of you still remember what a floppy disk is, and some of the sneaker net communication from computer to computer that propagated viruses. And the viruses then were kind of simple, straightforward, relatively show-off in nature. The guys back then, the people doing this writing of the malware were doing it for glory, for notoriety, for showing off to their friends, and so on. And each time that a new threat came out, whether it was in the early days of the polymorphic viruses, the zombies moving up to mass mailers, even as recent as in this 2001, 2002, every time a new problem would come about, security industry would come up with a new solution. New problem, a new attack comes out, a new solution. So I kind of consider that as a bit of a sequential, incremental type of technology improvement. However, now when we're looking at the opportunities coming along for virtualization, we see a new opportunity for both the good guys and the security providers such as McAfee, as well as the bad guys, the writers of the malware. Virtual systems themselves have been around for a long time too. Virtual systems can be viewed as starting back in the early days of maybe the IBM 370 with time sharing as a form of virtual systems. You had the only control of your particular your application, and from all intents and purposes your application was the only one running. You had full command of the resources. You had the full ability to you had the whole computer, whereas of course you really didn't. And in the later years, 2000 and onward, VMware has really come up in the product world as having a robust virtualization platform for the most prolific platform in existence today, that is Windows, Microsoft Windows. So the opportunities are there for companies such as VMware, for developers such as you, maybe someday, and researchers to be really capitalizing on and using virtualization going forward. Well, I suggest that there is a convergence of these two areas, path one, security, path two, the virtualized systems, that is going to yield some really interesting and novel applications that have not yet been discovered, have not yet been capable. So that this convergence of security and virtualization really is at the essence of my discussion today. Of course, McAfee is very interested in security solutions. We are the only pure play security vendor in the industry, and others dabble in operating systems. Other Others who do security dabble in storage, disk storage, and facilities and so on. McAfee only does security, so it's sort of natural that I believe through some of our own internal work we are leading some of the thought. We are the thought leaders in the areas of applying virtualization techniques to the area of security. Now, a little bit of basics, but from a virtualization perspective, what is virtualization? It's a way for your application or one's application running on a computer to believe that it has the full command of the resources of that computer. Oftentimes it's the exclusive use of that computer, whereas there can be multiple OS images sitting on that same computer thinking the same thing, that it too has the same exclusive access to the resources. So the virtualization is really a virtualization of the hardware computer system, and this allows for many benefits to come about that we'll talk about in a bit, but in summary it's scalability of applications. It is for backup and redundancy purposes. It is for off-site storage and in general what I call operational aspects, operational IT aspects of a data center, fundamentally for the enterprise. Along the way, by the way, what I'll be talking about is the applications of virtualization and security from the perspective of an enterprise use. What IBM, what McAfee, what a large university, what the U.S. government would use in its managed environment for security throughout its entire population. However, also, to a lesser degree, but equally important and equally exciting to me, are those applications of virtualization and security in the home market. So you have computers at home. Some of you have children who are banging away on the keyboard and such. I suggest, and I'll explain how there are ways that the virtualization plus security equation can equally benefit the home environment. It's a different situation there. It's not as managed. Oftentimes you, especially you folks here, are the ones who are the systems administrator for your network, and therefore tools and techniques would be different than those used in the enterprise. As the chart shows here, there are two models in general for virtualizing the hardware. The model shown on the left is a host OS based, and it shows two guest operating systems, and again these OS images are sitting atop a virtual machine monitor, which serves as that interface to the hardware below. So fundamentally that VMM, that virtual machine monitor, is looking upward, providing an upward visibility to the OS images running on top that present the entire computer system resources available, the disk, the memory, even down to the CPU type of access. So the OS, the images that are, the applications running in the OS is up there, think that they're talking down directly to the hardware. It's just that there can be multiple of them. To the operating system, the virtual machine monitor looks like an application. It's sitting on top of there, and it's asking for resources, and it's giving response back and controlling. Frankly, that is the kind of environment that we see in the home environment, at least, and I'm speaking from the term, I'll be speaking a lot in terms of VMware. It's probably most understood by a lot of us. Other Linux-based systems, and XenSource is another good one, is more prevalent in a lesser community and also in the server community. But I'll be speaking from the VMware perspective. VMware Workstation is this host-based type of system that you would see in the home use. Developers use a lot of this for their purposes of switching back and forth among different services that are running, having a computer node that is running as a server, another VM is running as a client, and then development can happen with that in that manner. The model on the right, the hypervisor-based, is one that is typically used in the enterprise at the server level, and it essentially takes that VMM and host operating system and combines it and provides several services within it, as indicated by shown here. Essentially, this layer, the hypervisor layer is the operating system is running on bare metal, as we say, and it is, for all intents and purposes, the only interface to the VMs, not shown here, but there's a guest OS above here and a guest OS above there too, sitting on top. So it provides a more, it's thin. Thinner is really good in security because thin is simple. Thin is easy to test and ensure that it's operating properly. So these are the two basic models. I go through it in a little bit of detail because much of my follow-on discussion is going to be focused on ways that we can interconnect into this architectural depiction to provide security functions, if you will, with virtualization technology. Now, now that some of the construct of the architecture is presented, why virtualize to begin with? Maybe starting from the upper left-hand corner. Obviously, virtualization presents a great opportunity for scalability. Essentially, it provides a nice environment for multiple applications to be running, and from the perspective of the user and the applications, that the hardware is free. There's lots of hardware available, whereas actually all these VMs might be running on the same computer platform. The faster provisioning of software, faster provisioning of security specifically in the systems, and the user activity is easily able to be monitored through the virtualized services provided. There are downsides that we'll touch on a little bit along the way, is very single point of failure, perhaps. There's all your eggs are in one basket. If the virtual machine monitor or the hypervisor, heaven forbid, is compromised, the entire machine and all its applications running on it are brought down. Rootkits have perhaps a more insidious effect on the overall system should they be getting into the computer. But as with any good technology that comes along, there are drawbacks and cautions that need to be considered along the way. Now to the convergence and coming to some of the meat. And again, I see that convergence is providing a plethora of opportunities for software vendors, for developers, for users of the system. And what I've done is I've coined a bit of a term. It's not scathingly brilliant, but it's secure virtualization. Kind of embodies the very essence of what I'm getting at here. It's that convergence, that combination. We have a white paper that's available shown at the link that kind of goes into this in more depth. But in that paper, I go through and I describe secure virtualization as really kind of being grouped into, having functionality grouped into 5 categories or 5 pillars, what I call 5 pillars. I'll be going through these pillars because it will really illustrate in a moderate technical depth what it is that is specifically being offered, at least in one company's view of that combination of security and virtualization. In the order that I'll touch on it, you can see that by turning your head a bit to the side, is essentially NAC for VM. And I'll be using some security terms here, and I'll explain them briefly, but I won't go into them in great depth. Or network access control, the network admission control for virtual machines. A second pillar is offline VM scanning. A third one is virtualized. The third one is unfettered monitoring. Then virtualized risk management, and then security management, scalable security management. Each of these is a bucket, a category, a grouping of functions that are essential to enterprise deployment of security systems that are greatly enhanced, or that can be, and I suggest will be greatly enhanced through the use of virtualization concepts. NAC for VM. This perhaps illustrates one of the fundamental uses of virtual machine technology right now that I think can be implemented right away. First, let me say that virtual machines and virtualization technology, VMs, whether it's VMware or Xen, really are no different from an operational perspective than an application running on a specific physical computer. It's an application running with use of the hardware services and available. Now, from a security perspective, same too. Security services can run in that VM in a very similar manner as they do today for physical systems. So saying it real directly, McAfee software and probably most security vendor software can run in VMs much as they do today on physical systems. You can run your AV, your anti-spam, your HIPS, your host intrusion protection, behavioral detection technology, firewalls, your updating mechanisms for the DAT or the virus signatures. All of these can run in the individual VMs. But you might say to yourself, well, gee whiz, if I've got an industry Gartner, I believe it is, that says that there's an 8-to-1 consolidation happening in the server industry today. Eight, on the average, 8 VMs are running on a physical box today in an average typical data center. The data that I'm referring to is from HP, who presented at VMworld most recently. So with an 8-to-1 cluster, if you will, of applications running on a single box, I mean, notwithstanding the thoughts about how they are segregated and how they are replicated and all your eggs in one basket, just assume that for the case there are 8 on one box, one could have 8 individual sets of security software in each of those, one in each of those VMs. Not too efficient. So there is the first inkling of opportunities that come about for ways to be better leveraging security within a virtual machine. Okay, so come back now to NAC. NAC is a network admission control, a way for a computer, a laptop that you might have, to be plugged into your network, and for the IT guy back in your IT shop to have the confidence that that new computer joining the network is healthy, that it's fully provisioned with the latest security software, the latest signature files, and it has all of the corporate policies and requirements set up in it, so it can successfully join the network without bringing the network down, without introducing other kinds of problems. Well, this system right now consists of the network, of the computer joining the network, shown on the left, and in the center is a rogue detection or a network detection type of computer that ultimately funnels back after authentication through the ACS back to the management server. And the management server is an essential part of a security system that obviously checks policy, it provisions the different network elements, and that's in a normal computer system. What we're suggesting here is that it's a great opportunity for applying virtual machines in each of the locations, whether it be at the endpoint in a manner that I was sort of suggesting, typical for home computing as well. By running the endpoint on a virtual machine, it is easy to revert back to a known good policy configuration, an acceptable, healthy machine, if you will, on a moment's notice, instead of taking that machine offline, quarantining it, and having it perhaps not available to be plugged into the computer network for days because of the reprovisioning that's necessary. So virtual machines could very nicely be used on the endpoint. Virtual machines could be used, in effect, in a similar manner for the security management station in the upper left-hand corner. Not just from a scalability perspective, although that in itself is a good clustering mechanism, that when the management system is run in a virtualized environment, it too can have backup, redundancy, scalability, all of the operational benefits of an IT system. So in this way, here is a sort of a typical use of virtual machines for different components within an architecture. NAC for VM, though, is also more of a, I call it a philosophical type of benefit that can be derived. If you're involved in security, you understand that NAC in general is a very once it's implemented properly, which in itself is kind of a stumbling point that we have today in the industry. But NAC for computer systems, network access control, offers the IT administrator the confidence, the relative ease that he has for allowing other computers to join into the network. That same level of comfort is given to VMs joining the network. Now I say that purposefully because we're going to get right now to the offline scanning of VM images. Right now I view industry and IT professionals as being somewhat overwhelmed with some of the technology and new capabilities that are essentially being forced on them. Their bosses, the CIOs, the CEOs, after saying the first thing of business that you have as an IT leader is to keep me out of jail. That's number one. That has to do with compliance and policy and regulations and all of that. Number two, you need to reduce my costs. You got a budget. In fact, today you're going to have a lesser budget because of all of these newer technologies they say are offering you some capabilities. So here you are, you're the IT manager out in industry, and you're saying, oh my gosh, I'm already 5 layers or 5 versions behind an SAP updates because I'm just don't have the workforce to be deploying all these things. Now this virtualization thing comes along, whereby it's easy to press a button and take a snapshot. And an IT administrator is going to be greatly, your IT guy who runs around from office to office fixing problems every day, he's going to say, good, I finally got this computer down to a really well-provisioned, properly provisioned. It is healthy. It is golden. This is good. What are you going to do with virtualization? With your if you're running this in a VM environment, I'm going to take a snapshot of it so I have a backup of this golden, well-provisioned VM. Heck, I'm going to take 2 of them just to be sure. By the time you do that all day long, you're going to have a lot of VMs associated along the side. My point is that there is going to be something called VM sprawl, something that the industry is calling VM sprawl, where there's just a proliferation of VMs. How are you, the IT guy again, going to be provisioning this VM tomorrow or next week when it comes time that you need this thing to back up because your main server went down? You're going to pull a VM out of your pocket, right, and get your services back up. Well, if it hasn't been in operation for 24 hours or a week or a month, because you've got really robust hardware perhaps, you're going to bring this VM on, but it hasn't for a month, has not seen updates from the manufacturer, from Microsoft, has not been pushing down updates. McAfee has not been able to get its updates, security update. It is out of date. It is stale. So you need to, on a regular basis, somehow bring these VMs onto a system in the back room, offline, reprovision them, take them off. All day long, do that. For all of the neat benefit of taking the snapshots of VMs, now you've got this problem of VM sprawl because you got to keep these things current for them to hold their value of being easily replaceable on a moment's notice. One solution at any rate, and that doesn't require a lot of resources, is going to be the ability to crack open a VM image, scan it, provision it, update it, and put it and close it up and put it back, all while it's sitting on a disk drive, not being operational. So the benefits that are definitely needed in this area the capabilities that are needed are to do that, to have APIs to do that. It turns out that VMware and a couple of others are providing some APIs or developing some APIs, and they'll soon become available. Some of these are already available, but the advanced techniques and advanced leaders in providing some of the capabilities of doing this are going to find this to be a pretty valuable tool, a management tool to be providing. Unfettered monitoring. This is another pillar. This is the third pillar. Unfettered monitoring. We had some interesting discussions with Microsoft in the industry last year about this time with their introduction of Vista, and specifically on 64-bit systems, there are kernel patch protection mechanisms built into it in Microsoft's attempt to strengthen the operating system. And I applaud their efforts, by the way. We might have been somewhat critical of them, and I think we came to some healthy dialogue in the press and so on, and they really listened to the industry players, not just McAfee, but others, and really provided some additional capabilities for providing access to the kernel that we currently have today in XP. But in 64-bit Vista, for example, the security mechanisms that Microsoft is offering is restrictive, and we can't apply the same security techniques tomorrow in Vista 64 that we are able to do today. But as I said, I really applaud Microsoft for listening to us in the industry, and then they provided some additional APIs to do this kind of access. But this unfettered monitoring is essential for us to stay one step ahead, or at least on an equal footing with the bad guys. So now in the consideration of virtualization, the ability to have unfettered access to the system provides a plethora of really interesting opportunities that come about. What I've shown here is a picture, of course, that describes, actually it happens to show the Model 1, which the one model which has the virtual machine, which has the VM monitor, the VMM layer, but it can equally be applied to a hypervisor type of environment. So what I'm suggesting is we have the typical model shown here with a couple of VMs and guest OSs sitting on there, running their own applications, independent of each other, sitting on the hardware, each with their own view to the hardware. And security OS, security VM sitting over here, the security applications going in. And what I had suggested earlier as far as leveraging security applications, or any other applications for that matter, in one VM that could take advantage of scanning, it could take advantage of monitoring, provisioning other VMs that are operating in the system. But through the use of some virtualization techniques, there are ways that this effort can be done better and faster and more comprehensively. In effect, I'm suggesting there are some things, there are these items here that I'll be speaking about, cannot be done today, or cannot be done as effectively today without as they can be with virtualization. So stealth monitoring, by definition, applications running in this external VM would not have the access to the VMs that are running here, because the boundary, the hard boundary enforcement that is given to a virtual machine. As I said, this VM number 1 is not able to look into VM 2 and modify any of its resources, and same too for VM 2 going into VM 1. Same too for the security VM. But through some memory monitoring techniques, some memory reconstruction, process reconstruction techniques, and interpreting the memory, looking at the raw memory that's going on in into these target OSs, the security software running external can indeed have some visibility, can indeed know what's going on, and implement some monitoring techniques that are completely stealth in orientation. Certainly the malware and other applications running in the VMs are not able to even see that there is security software monitoring their actions. Just as an aside, one of the insidious operations performed by malware is to go in, and first thing when it gets into a system is to actually detect that there is security software running. And it knows McAfee software, it knows Sophos and all of the others. So what it does, it goes and it turns it off. Look down, in fact this happened at an earlier talk, it wasn't quite this way, but it made me think of it. I glanced down at the computer that I was using, and the little Wi-Fi light was on. I never have my Wi-Fi on. But a technique that malware software is able to do is go into this operating system and turn on certain ports, turn off certain ports, unbeknownst to the user, such that access can be made into and out of the operating system. That's the same kind of stealth, or that's the kind of monitoring or changes to the system that we can be watching for, and the bad guys don't even know that we're there. So if you don't know that McAfee is watching you, you're not going to try to turn McAfee off. So you'll maybe be a little bit more brazen in your approach to infecting the system. Behavioral stack walking. Watching the computer stack, triggering on the return operations that, again, you can depict either from the out-of-context operation, as shown here in the security OS, or even from in-context, a protected area that your security software is running at within the guest operating system, again, protected by its own internal boundary, is a technique for watching for buffer overflow protection, for watching calling sequences of applications going into the VM monitor and the computer's resources. Fundamentally, watching for abnormalities in a heuristics-based sense is what we have for behavioral detection techniques. So behavioral detection for stack walking, watching the monitor. Watching for API execution and access monitoring, again by those same APIs, by looking at the calling sequences down to the kernel level, to the various libraries and services, is another way that is can be enhanced greatly, and is being enhanced greatly through virtualization, by virtualization doing that type of inspection. Rootkit detection. You've doubtless heard a little bit of some news this past year as announced at Black Hat and DEF CON, two security-related conferences this year. Joanna Rutkowska, the owner of, what company is she at? I've forgotten now, but she introduced a technique called Blue Pill, the first open source rootkit. Now that has tremendous significance. If you're not into security, rootkits are very insidious software programs, stealth programs, that live down in the lowest areas of the computer, the kernel, and they are able to go in and pretty silently, pretty stealthily monitor actions, change the system around, ultimately to steal information, typically to steal personal information, credential information, or to provide different kinds of attacks, denial of service attacks. So rootkit detection is probably, if you recall that sequence of security threats and security solutions, rootkits was one of the more modern ones that we have today that's been most recently deployed by us vendors. But they're tough to find. Rootkit detection, again, through the techniques of either in context or out of context virtualization monitoring by means of virtualization, can be similarly stealthily detected to the benefit of us, computer users. The immutable, unchangeable systems monitoring is another area where, again, if you're stealth and if you're off to the side, or if you're in a self-contained in-context module within the guest operating system, you're able to look outside and do the same kind of monitoring that we do today, same kind of security software for what we call HIPS, Host Intrusion Protection software, that vendors supply today, but do that from a protected environment. Monitoring of memory, as I've been describing, intra-API monitoring, and plumb lining. Plumb lining, again, is a way of following the call sequences for your APIs that go down and access the kernel to the lower levels in order to affect the given function that needs to be done. And again, if that call sequence, that plumb lining, is able to find or discovers that the typical scenarios are being followed, you'll be okay. But if not, that's when the flag is raised, and again, the security software will be able to flag the system, you, the user, the management system, or otherwise just note that there is some problem. Execution profiling. These are all different technical approaches that are enhanceable today. Watching the elevation of execution priorities, watching for changes in the registry stack and some of the execution stacks down below that normally aren't touched, but if those are changed, those are the things that are able to affect the way that the applications work. That is, if malware is in gear. Patch guard bypassing. Not a good word, but the point is that if there is some mechanism down below, patch guard is that kernel patch protection mechanism that Vista 64 uses to protect the kernel. And if the technique I'll just state the technique and you can draw your conclusion. The technique that's used is if patch guard determines that there is somebody accessing and modifying registers, putting API hooks in to determine calling sequences and to be injecting potentially malware processes into normal calls, the KPP or the patch guard system blue screens the system because it detected what can be only to be determined as malware in the system. So that's not an overly elegant way of protecting a system, and as I said, that's different from the way that security vendors protect software systems today. The fourth pillar is that of scalable security management. I cannot emphasize enough the importance, the value, the benefit that is able to be brought about through the use of a well-constructed, well-designed, extensible security management system. You can think of it as a hub of the wheel. The security management system is able to provision all of the endpoints, all of your routers, your switches, your endpoint computers with the proper policies, with the proper security software to make sure that it is compliant with your corporate guidelines. Ultimately, I alluded a bit to this before, but I give this a separate section because we can use VMs within a security system, as shown here, to truly make it a hierarchical, cluster-based, redundant, and scalable management system. Throughout the architecture of that management, it would access down to various layers within the system as it provisioned that policy out to different areas, and even the subservient server nodes would be outfitted with the VMs for immediate scalability and backup in the event that there are problems of a certain type or a certain type of protection is necessary. All of this leads to really where enterprises are at today as far as the security life cycle. Risk management is the basis is at the root of all security IT people's modus operandi. Whether they know it or not, they are really managing 4 quadrants that we've depicted here that can simply be described as find what's on your network today, figure out how many assets, what kind of assets that you have in your network, figure out what vintage they are, what the vulnerabilities are. There are tools that can be run to determine where the vulnerabilities, security vulnerabilities are, and then to evaluate those vulnerabilities relative to your specific corporate needs, deploy and enforce, deploy protection software and hardware in order to really protect that system that your enterprise is running on, and receive back information about its operation, its exceptions, if there are problems, and then deal with those through a fix and comply area. So patches would be deployed on systems that are deemed to be either out of compliance or out of date or attacked and compromised. So again, that cycle of life, or cycle of security life, is really typical. There is no beginning, there is no end, but ultimately this is the sequence that is followed in a typical day of an IT manager's life. So layering on top of this, Foundstone is one of the tools that McAfee provides that provides some of that vulnerability scanning. Could be living and is indeed going to soon be living in virtual machines that are sitting at various points within the system, able to be instantiated on a moment's notice based on the kind of vulnerability that might be demonstrated or known to be existing or determined through other mechanisms. Some very specific targeted scans and proper specifically provisioned VMs would be spun up and put into gears. Same too for asset discovery and visualization of the network resources. Again, the VM sitting outside is that external context, that out of context monitoring that I described. A sentinel that's often described too as a sentinel that's able to watch over the overall system, again through using the memory modeling techniques, through special interfaces that do exist right now that are being enhanced at the hypervisor layer with the various manufacturers and APIs that would allow us security players, to go down and with proper authentication to ensure that it's a security player, go down into the system and have some visibility to the goings-on of the kernel mechanism, if you will, or the lower level parts of the system. Again, having a greater visibility to how the system is operating. Is it operating atypically, which would be an indication that there is malware present in that system. And VMs operating inside the system, that boundary inside the virtual machine target itself, virtual machine or components that live within the VM that perform taste testing. Remember the days of old, we used to have the kings and would have a pigeon or some unlucky court jester who would first taste the food, and if the pigeon didn't keel over, or if the jester didn't fall over dead, the king can go on and finish eating his food. Well, that same kind of taste testing is an interesting technique that's in play, that's in development right now in an automated manner. In other words, if a virtual machine that's spun up inside a questionable system is able to survive, and it's not being detected as having been attacked by some malware, then it can give a thumbs up to the rest of the system saying, okay, this system is currently clean, but if I ever drop over dead, call it a watchdog monitor is another way of looking at it too. That's a good indication that that VM has been compromised, whereupon you bring down that VM and you bring up a new one, and your operation, your enterprise operation is up as soon as possible. Certainly a lot faster than it is today. Virtual jail cells, drive-by downloads are particularly insidious. Today we've got bots. Bots are the most prolific challenge that we have today. I described in an earlier talk how there is an exponential rise in the last 2 years especially, whereby we are experiencing over 30% of all malware ever has been experienced within the last 2 years. This is primarily through the use of Trojans. The bad guys using Trojans to deliver bots to networks, computer robotic programs that live down quietly in your system, that communicate outward to other computer systems and act as a funnel, a portal, taking personal information and funneling it off to a bot herder, a bot master, who takes your credit card information, your social security number, your sales database, and sells it to somebody else. Because today it's a profession. Well, this is the mechanism by which that profession is perpetuated. So the ability for a system to ultimately detect that kind of robotic operation is pretty valuable. And again, virtualization comes about there. Drive-by downloads are the mechanism that when you go to a website, and oftentimes you go to a bad website, you don't even know it. And it's a bad website because bad stuff, Trojans primarily, get downloaded without your control to the system and ultimately install the bots. If you had a jail cell, a protected boundary area of memory, aka virtual machine, that your browser lived in, and after any browsing session to a given website, that website or that jail cell, that your browser space, were scanned and detected to be free of malware, then anything in there, including legitimate files that you would have downloaded, could be promoted to general computer memory space. A great value, a great service will have been performed to your individual users doing the browsing. Any kind of automated program that accesses the network, not just a human interaction browser, could similarly benefit from that kind of virtualized protection, jail cell. Data leakage prevention, DLP, and I mentioned NAC, the containment of data, the containment of good data from getting out, the containment of bad data from getting out too. Again, the malware and the botnet types of information. There's the virtual taste testing in the jail cell that I mentioned. Of course, AV, firewall, antivirus, firewall, anti-spyware, anti-spam, intrusion protection, all of these different kinds of capabilities we have now are able to be implemented and leveraged in a virtual system from inside or outside, again, protected from the malware that it's actually looking to detect. Protected from the malware it's trying to detect. Patching and remediation has an immense benefit. The ability that a virtual machine, virtualized systems, virtualized bots, if you will, to mix a term there, are able to automatically provision with updates and reduce the time required for quarantining and otherwise getting your system back into an operational state when it is found to be out of it. Now, I've mentioned many times the different, I call them the IT operational benefits of virtualization, that of scalability, that of redundancy, failover, backup. Anybody who is into CISSP type of certification, this is all near and dear to your hearts, because this is what corporations really need. For you to be an effective IT manager at an enterprise, or heck, even at home, if you've got any kind of personal data, your password key storage, your favorite sites, all your best downloads, you don't want all of that to be wiped away. You want to be sure that you've got an ability to easily back up, easily bring back into compliance, or bring a good operating image back in place of something that's been compromised through a rollback process. But these are all operational benefits that core virtualization techniques have that bring to security, they bring to security risk management. Disaster recovery and business continuity. Big time stuff in the world today. Secure virtualization. Now, protecting the consolidated workloads. We're getting at that, and monitoring and protecting the VM communications. How to be dealing with the offloaded or the offline VMs that are proliferating, the VM sprawl. These are all real challenges that are facing industry today. There are no solutions that are at least in great availability and use. There's a lot of good thoughts here at the university that I've been plugging into. McAfee's been working on a lot of leading edge types of techniques, many of which I'm describing here. And for the record, none of this is a promise, a forecast, or an availability of product. Some may happen, some may not. But this is what any reasonably intelligent individual would be able to think of when coming to the point of having, realizing that there's two convergent technologies in the industry today. And again, virtualization and security. There's got to be benefit. There's also going to be drawback and some problems. I mentioned a couple before. The single point of failure is a big thing. IT people rushing to implement these techniques are going to be experiencing some really real challenges with respect to putting all their eggs in one basket. If you have, again, my example, I used 8 virtual servers running on one piece of hardware. If that hardware goes down, man, you're in a lot of trouble, because you'll have immediately the need to replace 8 servers that are gone. So you've got to be thinking along the lines of how to manage that scalability in a segmented, in a managed way. Don't put all your eggs in one basket. Have a bunch of baskets with all your eggs in them. Procedures and processes all need to be changed in the enterprise. These items that I've been mentioning here today are the ones that you specifically are going to be helping us in industry, helping all of industry to be solving. The techniques that you're learning about, whether it's programming techniques, specific approaches for analyzing memory space and deriving different static and dynamic analysis tools from all of these are going to be used in effective enterprise, helping to protect that cycle of security life, which is incredibly important. Again, to the IT people, to the shareholders, to keeping the CEO out of jail, and to keep folks like you and me having jobs ultimately in the day-to-day types of operations. These are the kind of things that I really wanted to share with you today and give you, on one hand, it's a broader visibility to the opportunity of virtualization that it offers us, a bit of the technical areas of implementation of that opportunity, and then lastly, some of the challenges that we still have. We don't have all the answers, and they're going to be pretty tough answers to come up with. I mean, for example, if we did not have ways to, if the VM vendors were proprietary with the structure of their offline VM images, in other words, that VMs 59 through 63 that are off on a server someplace, and if there's no way to crack it open and to scan it for malware, to scan it to see if it's properly provisioned, to pump in new antivirus signatures, updates from the manufacturer. If there's no way to do that, we've got a big problem. But then again, if there's no way to do it, then by definition there will be a need to do it, because virtualization offers that much of an opportunity to the IT community. Are there questions? I've been going at a pretty good rate. I appreciate your attention. Questions I can entertain right now?
Let's see if I can get this to turn on here. Here we go. So, George, that's a fairly comprehensive overview of virtualization that purports to solve many of the problems we have, but a lot of the advantages, in fact most of the advantages that you highlighted, can actually be turned around to be problems. And some of them are security problems, in the sense that if the hypervisor is compromised, we don't have any evidence of the compromise in the virtual memory images that help with forensics or even being able to tell we've been had. And the stealth monitoring is another example. I'm not going to go through all of them. But with stealth monitoring, the ability to spy on, violate privacy, filter off information is greatly enabled, because we no longer are able to observe when that's being done to us. And so I don't see that there are clear advantages to this technology, and I wondered if you'd care to comment.
I think you're right, Scott. As I mentioned, there are definitely two edges to the sword, two edges to any new technology come down the pike. And what you describe is definitely the bloodier, or what could be the bloodier edge. I've been describing the benefits that can be derived, the wonderfulness that can come about. With that comes an inherent need for, in my opinion, other tools and techniques to be developed along this whole line to help that being a watchdog for normal, good operating people on a system. There's an opportunity for bad guys to even use the techniques that I've been describing. Along the way, I mentioned in access to some of the access that's being planned right now to the hypervisor is that it needs to be authenticated in a very careful way. But any software solution, any software-only solution is defeatable. There's nothing that is impervious, at least in the software realm. You can make it tough. You can tie it down to the CPU, which is an entirely additional discussion that will be happening very shortly. That is tying the security software and hypervisors down to the silicon, the CPU, memory structures, and I/O ports, making it a stronger security solution. But still, there is always going to be ways. So whatever we do in the security world is going to be applicable by the hardware guys too, by the malware guys. And then even who's watching the good guys to make sure that they are not snooping. Man, I really think we ought to protect you against your perhaps your unwitting use of I'm trying to think of a good example, but we ought not really look into use our techniques to be looking into the privacy related issues of any computing user. Follow-on question, yeah.
Yeah, well, just to comment on that. For instance, there are products now. You were talking about administering home machines, and I have a teenage daughter, so sometimes those are of interest. But you can buy products that allow you to monitor your children's use to make sure that they don't go to dangerous sites. But you can take that same and you can monitor your spouse, your adult children, your roommates, and with a stealth monitoring and a hypervisor, it becomes perhaps even more possible to do that. And there's the hardware, the software can't tell a difference as to who you're monitoring. So we're making it perhaps easier to violate privacy, and that should be a concern.
I think you're right, and I think at every step at every point of technological advance, there is an equal pivotal point of ethical evolution that either happens or needs to happen. In this case here, I think it still has yet to be discovered as being something around. Parental controls is a great example of that. So I predict that in addition to all the wonderful tools and accessories that are going to grow out of this convergence that I've been speaking of here today, there's probably also going to be a spin-off of other tools and capabilities that will, and hopefully not regulations, but in some way the ethical aspects of that need to be considered. Question? Riley.
So, in some ways, like as I kind of look back over what security companies put forth as like, here's our next big security thrust. Then when you look back on it a few years later, you find it was something that was really great for a few months, but then it was just a matter of time for the attackers to kind of elevate themselves, and it was just one more step in the arms race. In your mind, obviously you would say that this is something different than just another 2-month patch. So what in your mind makes this somewhat fundamentally different from previous solutions that have come up?
So if I can paraphrase the question, what makes me feel that virtualization is not just a passing fad, and what makes it passing might be the bad guys catching up and using the same techniques, or maybe even some other technology kind of taking over in the coming months or year or two to make this just, and stated from an industry perspective, why put so much development into something that might be just a passing fad? That's a great question. I think we never know what we don't know. In other words, I don't know what's going to be coming around the corner tomorrow. I think it's up to us as technologists to maybe take a good look at all of these different other technologies and other converging paths, perhaps, that might either be conflicting, superseding, or otherwise just providing a better way of going about what we're trying to do than investing a lot of money into given tool sets that I'm describing here. So the simple answer is I don't know. But I think the best information that I have as a technologist, with relatively limited focus, I mean, I have a good visibility with the industry, with journalists and analysts, but frankly, at the end of the day, they don't know an awful lot. I mean, it really, the essence of new technology is coming from folks like you, from research institutions like you, from advanced research labs such as McAfee and Avert Labs, and other companies like us. So right now, all that I hear with my ear to the rail is that this has the potential for providing some neat capabilities. All of us in the industry right now are looking at these capabilities to see how much it's going to cost us to invest, to provide these tools. Correspondingly, what's the ROI? I'm often, as a lead geek at the company, I'm often enamored with technology. I'm gung-ho. Let's do it. Why? Because it can be done. But my product management buddies say, well, show me the money. So I'm at a constant battle to provide an ROI, return on investment type of analysis. How much is it going to cost? How much are we going to gain back in frankly, revenue of our products? How many more of our products are going to be purchased, or how much more can we command for our products because of this extra capability? I don't think anybody really has the answer yet, because right now I'm suggesting, and evidence is proving out, that we can keep computer systems safer than we have been able to using virtualization. That is a given. How much is that worth? What other drawbacks might there be to a given technical decision or a technical path that is taken? Those are the unanswered questions right now. But good question. Don't know what's around the corner. Mike.
I think virtualization is bad news for the bad guys. I really think so, because and it doesn't mean it's going to solve everything, but just look at what you have to secure in the current environment without using this kind of technology. What's your task? And think of what you have to do to secure what you described. And I would rather secure what you described, because the interfaces are well defined, it's more orderly, it's less chaotic. I know what I have to do. Whereas the current situation, if I was an insurance company, let me put it that way, I charge you a lower rate if you did this. And of course, I may lose my company, the bundle of money, and be fired, but that's what I would do.
No, you're absolutely right. You're absolutely, just to paraphrase, I'm not sure that your microphone is on. I think you're saying essentially that this is a good. This could be a good thing. It could provide the benefits that we're providing, and we could eventually command a higher price for our products, or a new product would be purchased, and because of the benefits that come about. If I kind of twist your question or your observation a little bit, I could also say that the bad guys, this is a dangerous thing, the bad guys are not all that smart. On a general wide scale, the malware writers they're out for fast buck. They're not going to go for the tougher interfaces to crack. Virtualization is going to be a little bit hard to implement, and to implement well and fully. There are though, of course, exceptions, and some of the bad guys indeed are going to provide the similar situations that we're using for bad purposes, as we're trying to use for good purposes. There are instances now, for the third angle that you said, as an insurance company, for example, you would, if you were an insurance company, you would give a discount to someone's rate if they were employing some demonstrably better protection. It's the same kind of theory that, the same kind of techniques that are followed today when you get a discount on your car insurance, when you have a car alarm system. I don't know of any insurance policies for computer systems, but if every single one of you in here if there is anybody that does not implement any kind of antivirus, firewall, anti-spyware system on your computer and keep it current, you are playing with fire, and you really don't care about your personal identity. and your own checkbook, your financials, because it's at risk when you don't do it. That's just the world that we live in. So again, if there comes about to be some kind of a discount or an attaboy or some kind of a monetary benefit coming about because you're running better security software, that's going to be the reasoning.
Okay. I was at VMworld last year, and I was asking everybody I met, do you have any plans on leveraging virtual machines and virtualization for security? So I'm really glad to hear your talk today, even if it's a year after I was asking people that question. What I'd like to know is I'd like to have an insight from you about what is the hardest to do in what you're attempting, and sort of in a blunt way, why has it taken so long to get there? So what are the challenges in what you're accomplishing?
Wow. Well, the challenges thus far, in my opinion, have been some of the proprietary interfaces that are on the solutions. I think mostly in terms of Microsoft Windows types of platforms, which immediately brings me to VMware being the only real solution that I see in that space. And again, 99 and 44/100% of the business world uses PC and the Microsoft systems. So that's a valid place to start, but admittedly not the only one. So the interfaces have been proprietary. They have not seen. They've been in the last 3-4 years. It's only been the last 3 or 4 years that VMware has seen stellar growth, as evidenced by the recent IPO, of course, and it's anticipated to go even higher. Microsoft finally has gotten on, has started to unveil their particular solutions. So again, we're seeing a lot of evidence that it's finally happening. Before this time, it's a matter of it's not worth the money to invest in a solution that is not yet timed to really have benefit provided. I might not have said that completely straight, but if we invested a lot of money back 2-3 years ago during the earlier years of virtualization, in my opinion, it would not have been as impactful, and hence the ROI would not have been as great as it is right now.
Thank you.
Thank you again, George.